Okay, so I'll be talking about the different areas of a child's development. Of course, when a child is born, the first thing we see is that this is a baby. So parents often want to ask the caregiver or the doctor, so what's the sex of my baby? So it's a boy or it's a girl, and then everybody is happy because that's the physical area of the child. So we are usually concerned about the gender of the child, and then can my child see? Do my child have 10 fingers, 10 toes? Are the organs in the right place? And when parents see that, everybody is happy. However, in a child, especially when children are born to a certain age into adult life, there are different areas of a child's development. And that is what we see. And then we say, oh, this child is making progress. Now, we have the physical development, where this area is talking about how well is my child doing in terms of their physical area, the things we can see. Do my child see very well? How is the visual? How is the auditory? Does my child taste? Is my child growing in height? And the physical area of development is usually what everybody can see. And even parents can tell there is a problem here. So if a child is 2 years old and still has the height and the size of a baby that is 6 months old, of course it is glaring to everybody. Then how do parents ensure that the physical development of a child is panning out well? Of course, the food, fruits, vegetables, ensuring that the child is in an environment where they eat well, good water, no rashes on the skin is doing well. That is the physical development of the child. Then we look at the cognitive development of the child. This area deals with the intellectual capacity of the child. Now, some may say intellectual, cognitive. What does that even mean for a child? We're talking about how does your child process information? How does your child understand instructions? How does your child read non-verbal cues? It may surprise you that some children cannot pick non-verbal cues. Some of these things are not expressly taught. But then as a child develops cognitively, the child is able to ask questions, receive questions, the parent is able to give instruction, and the child is able to understand the instruction, ability to retain information. And it is in the cognitive development that we can even see language. So it's your child picking the language in the environment where he or she is growing. Does your child ask questions, and does your child understand the answers you have given? This development follows all the way into the school, into learning areas. And that is where we see the ability to read, to count, to do maths, to ask questions, critical reasoning, and all of that. All that falls into cognitive development. Then we go into what we call the social development. Social development we do not see as soon as a child is born, but then we can start seeing social development when babies get of a certain age. We want to see the babies show recognition that this is my mom, this is my dad. And then the baby is able to make distinctions between the people in the area where he or she is growing from the people who are total strangers. So we see things like when a baby sees his mom, we expect to see a smile. That is what we call a social smile. So at the age of 4 months, we are seeing things like smile, we are seeing things like cooing, we are seeing things like a baby wanting to be hugged, wanting to be embraced. And as the children grow, we are seeing how does your child interact with people in his environment. That is what social development is. And I often say to parents, is your child a bully? If your child is a bully, we are seeing a child who his social development is not doing so well. Is your child timid and has become the bullied? We're also seeing a child that the social development is not doing well, just the interaction. Is your child able to show sympathy, empathy to those around? When you observe your child playing with other children, what do you see? A child who is not able to engage other children, who is a loner, who stays on their own, or a child who wants to exact and say, it's my turn, I stay on the swing, I do not let anybody take their turn. All those things are what we see in social development, and even extends to how does your child even relate with their siblings, with you, the parents, with you, the teacher, the caregiver? How do they even begin to relate with adults? So all those go into the social development. Then we move into the emotional development. Emotional development just says, how does your child regulate their emotion? What is self-regulation? So people say, is it not normal for babies to cry, for toddlers to throw tantrums and do all of those things? Of course it is normal. Even adults cry, even adults show emotion. But then when we talk about the emotional development of a child, we are looking at when my baby is 6 months old and throws those tantrums like, I want this, because they are not able to express their emotions. What are we seeing as the child grows into a toddler, into a preschooler, into a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a teenage child? Are we seeing the emotions develop where the child is able to regulate their emotions and say, even though I did not get my way in this thing, I do not have to make everybody miserable. I do not have to bring down the television. I don't have to throw tantrums. What is that thing that makes a child who used to throw tantrums at 2 grow into that child who knows that, okay, this thing did not go my way. I don't have to, exchange fists. I don't have to shout. So that is the emotional development. Now, the 5th one, there are different areas of development. Some people say 4, some say 5, some bring in things. But then I am looking at this thing based on the Montessori style of learning. So the 5th one I would call the motor development. So in motor development, we are looking at the movement of the child. So there is the area of physical development. Some intellectuals will merge the physical and the motor, but then I would like to separate it, because a child could be growing. There are children with certain conditions who physically, you are looking at them, they are growing in height and weight, their IC and all of those things. There are 2 areas of the motor development. We have the fine motor skills, which is small muscles, and we're looking at the fingers, your wrist, and your hand. And we're looking at gross motor skills. We're looking at the larger muscles. So in the fine motor skills, we're looking at stuff like holding a cup, writing, carrying a tray, maybe flipping through pages, squeezing a sponge, or squeezing a towel. But for gross motor skills, which requires the larger muscles, we are looking at things like crawling, jumping, walking, skipping. Now, based on my experience, some parents may be rolling their eyes and like, all children do that. It's not that deep and all of that. But seriously, these are areas where as a caregiver, you should be looking out for. I have seen 5-year-olds who cannot hold a pencil. Their muscles are so weak because they have not been engaged. Now, do we just know about these areas of development just for knowing's sake? Oh well, so there is physical, there is the social, there is the cognitive. These areas of development affects the wholeness of the individual. And remember, what a child is eventually what the adult becomes. As an expert, when I look at an adult, I can tell you the kind of child that adult was. If the child was a neglected child, a child that was put in an environment where all these areas of development were refined. So our children eventually become certain kinds of adults. So what do we do with all these areas of development? Why are they important? Why is the physical development important? Physical is important because we all know, just like the doctors will say to us, when children do not eat healthy, their brains do not develop well. And when their brains do not develop well, their cognitive development is impaired. And when the cognitive development is impaired, it affects their social development, because then there is a stumbling block why they cannot relate with people in their environment. And when they cannot relate with people in their environment, it affects their emotions. Of course, nobody who is alone is eventually happy. And when it affects their emotions, it affects what they do. Everything is interconnected. There is no single area of development that we can say, oh, this is more important than the other. Now, the physical development, for me to say, is what parents are always looking at. So when I engage parents, maybe in a conference or counseling, so oftentimes, even in school, a parent goes to the teacher and when they look at their children, okay, you still walk, no rash, no issues with your eyes. Okay, you have issues with your eyes, we go to the eye doctor. Then they go to the school. Is my child doing well in maths, in English, physics, chemistry? When those 2 areas of development are okay, parents are like, I'm the parent of the 8th, thumbs up. So my question usually is, I ask parents, I said, How can you measure your child's social development? And they're like, okay. Can you tell if your child is a bully? Oftentimes parents can't say. Can you tell if your child is timid? They don't know. Can you tell how if your child has empathy towards other children? What's that? Can you tell how your child relates with their siblings? So that is all the things we see. Now, physical development is key, because when a child does not grow, of course, we know the role of the genetics. If I'm short and my husband is short, likely our children are going to be short. If I'm tall, my husband is tall. So we know all of that. But then we know that good food, good water, good products help the child's physical. And that's why we see sometimes, which is true, when you see children who are growing in areas where they do not take enough protein that helps them, it affects them, they have stunted growth. So we can see that. Then we look at the cognitive development. Why is it important? We want our children to grow, to harness all the potential given to them by Almighty. The child has the ability to invent, innovate. Where do all the innovations come from? Science, technology, arts, literature. But if children are not put in environments where they can actually expand their cognitive development, it's hampered. So what should parents do? Why is it important? Parents, we need to keep engaging. Teachers, let's not stifle these children when they ask questions. Let's not say, you talk too much, you're always asking questions. Why are you asking me if God is this or that? Because that is how children make sense of the environment where they live in, and their cognition is expanding by asking questions, by answering their questions, by putting them in environments that stimulates them, not environments where they are not allowed to express. Then the social development, no man, like they say, is an island. We need to learn how to interact. When children do not know how to interact with people, they get into fights. Often they become adults who always get into the problem with the law, because they do not know how to engage. And when children do not learn good social skills, it affects their relationships. Nobody wants to be their friend. And when nobody wants to be their friend, sometimes they want to exact that by force. They become bullies, or they become bullied, where there is peer pressure. Anybody tells them what to do, because they have not learned how to engage. And when children grow into adults who have poor social skills, it affects their relationships. It affects them in their place of work. It affects them how they engage with their colleagues. It affects them how they engage even with their bosses. And we know that today, research shows that the success of a person now is not usually in their IQ. If you made a first class or you have A stars, it is in your ability to close a deal. It is in your ability to make sales. It's in your ability to interact with people. It is in the emotional intelligence you show. And emotional intelligence is linked to your social development. So that is why it is important. And then emotional development is also important because it's also linked with the social. If your emotional development has not developed, where you want to have your way, or the child becomes a narcissist, or children are not able to even regulate their emotions, they become adults who fight. They become adults who bully others. They become adults who punch, who use their fists instead of using their minds. They become people who want to just exact themselves. And we've seen adults who throw tantrums. We've seen adults in rage. All those things show because as children, they did not learn how to regulate their emotions. And so what do we do as parents to ensure that these areas of development, we engage children, we start early? There is no such thing as, my child is still a baby, my child is still a toddler, my child is still young, let me wait until my child is 15 or 16. We start as early as possible to engage, to communicate, to relate, to teach, to correct. Let's not just be passive. So these are why the areas of development are quite key. In talking about child development, we also have to bring in what we call developmental milestones. So what are developmental milestones? They are just gauges. I would like to use the word gauges, things that we can say that when we see these things, then we can say, okay, the child is doing well here. So there is a universal developmental milestones for every stage of development. Children are in stages, so we do not group them at the same day. A baby of 3 months is not same as a baby that is 11 months. So there are different stages of development. And then we have just talked about the different areas of development. Now, the developmental milestone is my child measuring up to certain things I should be seeing at this particular stage? So those things are universal. For instance, we expect that at 12 months, a child should be able to crawl, sit up straight, hold something, and for some children even walk. So those are developmental milestones which are used. However, we now have what we call developmental delays. Now, some children experience developmental delays, meaning that they are not measuring up with their peers using those milestones as our gauge. So if I look at, let's say, cognitive development, where you can have language, speech. So we expect that at 6 months, a baby should babble, should make sounds like dada, monosyllabic sounds, dada, mama, and stuff like that. But then when we have a 6-month-old baby who is not making any sound, no sound at all, no monosyllabic sound, we can say there is a delay. And then we start to watch. So it is important for parents to even understand what are the developmental milestones I should be looking at in all areas. So we have people like me who are childhood consultants who help with that. We also have pediatricians who also help with that. It is important for parents to know this. It is important for teachers to know this, because the key to developmental delay is what we call early intervention. Early intervention is what every parent should do. That thing that says, there is a problem here, there is red flag here. Generally speaking, sometimes when children have developmental delays, they eventually catch up. There may just be that slow thing that happens. Maybe a baby is 12 months. For instance, my second child at 12 months was not walking. She would stand and she was frightened to take her first step. Meanwhile, her elder sister at 9 months was already trotting around the house. So my husband and I were worried, like, this child, 12 months, what's going on? Is there a problem? We were inexperienced parents, we did not know, and we're really concerned. 13 months, no steps. 14 months, she could walk around the house holding stuff. And then, of course, that is what you call a developmental delay, because generally speaking, for a milestone, at 14 months, a child should actually take steps without holding stuff. But at 15 months, voila, she stood up and she walked. Now, if at 18 months, 24 months, this child is still not moving, then there is cause for alarm. But do we have to wait for 24 months to notice that under that motor developmental skill, which is the gross motor skills that requires the larger muscle, that a child of 15 months, 18 months ought to be moving? Then we bring in early intervention. That is the time you should be talking to your pediatrician. That is the time your doctor should know, my child is 18 months and my child has not taken her first step. Because if there is early intervention, it gives professionals the time to begin to deal with this thing. And for some children, it may just be that there are things that can be done to help them to catch up with their peers. Or it could help the professional to know that we need to be making diagnoses here. There is a problem. For instance, if we come to the speech and we see a child who at 12 months, no monosyllabic sound, no sound at all. At 12 months, children should have string of phrases they can make. For instance, a child should be able to say at 12 months, I want water, I want mama at 12 months. For some children who have slight delays, they could just say water, meaning I'm thirsty, or mama, meaning I want my mom. But when at 12 months, 15 months, no sound from the child, none whatsoever, then it means there is a red flag. Because sometimes early interventions, like I said, it could just be, we need more stimulating environment. This child needs to be stimulated, put in an environment where we can help them. We are reading to them, we are talking to them. It may surprise you that oftentimes parents do not talk to their babies. Like, you see couples, they are talking to each other. They are not saying anything to the child. They are not even making words to the child. So it's just like, put it there, stop there. They're not having conversations, and those things affect the language development of children. And then you also find parents who mimic children in how they sound. I always tell adults, don't talk to children like you see a child that maybe is 12 months old, or because your child says, let's say, instead of noodles, for instance, your child calls it doodles. You see parents who mimic that child. Hey, honey, do you want doodles? I'm like, that's wrong. Your child is learning to say their words properly. So you see parents trying a retrogressive method where the child stays there. Your child needs you to talk to them. That's how their areas of development is affected, is impacted. So, but however, when you see these delays, please, parents, teachers, some teachers are the ones who notice first. It's some teachers that notice to say, I notice that this child does not see very well. This child is 4, but the child cannot see what is on a book and cannot transfer what is on a book to another book. The teacher calls the attention of the parent. Early intervention, visual. Maybe something is going on with their eyes. And then you take the child to the hospital. There are cases where teachers have brought the attention of parents and they go to the hospital and the child requires surgery. There are cases where even the auditory, the child requires hearing aid, but parents do not notice because they do not know how to marry the milestones and the delays. However, there are things we call developmental disabilities. So it's different from developmental delays. Developmental disabilities means there is a problem here. For instance, children who have autism, who have ADHD, who have cerebral palsy. We're not just looking at, oh, well, this child, we are still waiting for the child. If there is a developmental disability, the child, of course, is still early intervention. I have a friend who has a sister who has auditory impaired. She doesn't hear. So she says to me that when her sister was 6 months and there was this loud noise in the neighborhood, it was the time when there were all those Niger Delta issues, and they discovered that people were running helter-skelter and the baby was just there cooing. And the mom like, this baby was not startled. Something is amiss here. Of course, they started to do tests and they discovered shut down the inability to hear. So imagine the mom did not know that at this stage, a baby should be startled from a loud noise. They would have just been there. Of course, they took the baby to professionals, and that was how they knew, okay, the way you guys are going to communicate with this child is totally different. She needs special school, she needs special teachers. Now, even though she's auditory impaired, she can still relate with the environment. She can communicate. She's integrated in the society as against when she's being cut off. So developmental delays, sometimes children eventually catch up with their peers. They could just be slightly late, while when it stretches, then it calls for attention. But developmental disabilities are different from delays, because that one actually means that there is an issue here, and children with developmental disabilities are children would refer to having special needs or additional needs, and the way they are taken care of is different from the children who just have ordinary developmental delays.